She held the pen like she had already won. Vanessa signed first, bold, confident, final. She slid the papers toward me with a smile that said, "Finally." I signed without hesitation. No argument, no last words, no fight. Her lawyer flipped to the transfer documents. Page 8, page 9. Then he stopped. Not panic, something worse, recognition. He read the same line twice. Then he leaned in and whispered 4 words into her ear. Her pen slipped from her fingers. It hit the table and rolled. Vanessa didn't move. She just stared at the page as if the numbers had betrayed her. The judge asked if we understood the terms. I said yes. Vanessa didn't answer. That was the moment she realized this wasn't a surrender. But by then, she had already signed. And what she never understood, not once in 14 years of marriage, was that I had spent the last 3 years quietly preparing for that exact morning. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand how we arrived at that courtroom on an overcast Tuesday. How a marriage that looked perfect in photographs became a quiet contest of patience. How the man everyone pitied walked out with the only thing that mattered. My name is Bennett Hale. I'm 43 years old. Until 6 months ago, I was married to Vanessa Hale, a woman who believed in appearances more than arithmetic, and momentum more than math. We built something together once, a business, a home, a life that looked solid from the outside. She was the face, I was the foundation. For years, that arrangement worked. Then it didn't. When people ask what went wrong, I don't give them the dramatic version. There was no single explosion, no screaming match that shattered everything. It was quieter than that. It tilted. Slowly. Invisibly. Until the whole thing was leaning so far that collapse wasn't a question of if, only when. Vanessa didn't see it coming because she never looked down. She was too busy looking ahead. New clients, new projects, new validations that proved we were winning some invisible race. I looked down. I read the fine print. And 3 years before that courtroom morning, I found something she never expected me to find. Not because it was hidden, because she assumed I'd never bother to look. Before we go any further, tell me where in the world you're listening from. I'd love to know how far this story travels. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Tomorrow's story is one you shouldn't miss. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. I met Vanessa when we were both 26, hungry, unfinished, full of that reckless confidence that mistakes ambition for certainty. She was magnetic. I won't pretend otherwise. She walked into rooms like she belonged at the center of them. People leaned in when she spoke. Clients trusted her instincts before she'd proven anything. I was different. Quieter, steadier. The kind of person who reads contracts before signing and checks the math twice before committing. She called it caution. I called it survival. We started the interior design firm together the year after we married. Her vision, my structure. Her charm, my spreadsheets. It worked because we stayed in our lanes. Vanessa handled the clients, the presentations, the glossy moments that ended up in magazines. She had a gift for making people feel like they were investing in something extraordinary. I handled everything else. Vendor negotiations, permit filings, liability coverage, payment schedules that kept us solvent when projects ran long or clients paid late. It wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. And for a while, we were genuinely happy. Our son, Lucas, was born when I was 31. The world narrowed to something small and precious. Sleepless nights, tiny shoes,
the smell of baby soap that somehow made everything feel worth protecting. I told myself that if I kept the wheels turning, happiness would take care of itself. It doesn't work that way. Happiness isn't a byproduct of logistics, but I didn't learn that until later. The shift came gradually. Vanessa started wanting more. Bigger projects, higher profile clients, an office with a view that matched the image she was building. When I suggested we wait, build reserves first, reduce exposure, she heard something else. Fear. "You're always pulling back," she said once, tossing her phone onto the counter. "Every time we're about to grow, you find a reason to shrink." "I'm not shrinking, I'm stabilizing." She laughed, not warmly. "Stabilizing is just a slow way of standing still." I let it go, the way I always let things go. Because arguing with Vanessa was like arguing with weather. It passed or it didn't, but it never changed direction because you asked. She started making decisions without consulting me, signing contracts I hadn't reviewed, committing to timelines I hadn't approved. When I raised concerns, she waved them away. "I know what I'm doing, Bennett. Trust me." I wanted to, but trust isn't a feeling, it's a pattern. And the pattern was beginning to crack.
The night she asked for the divorce, I was standing in the kitchen holding a wooden spoon. Nothing dramatic, just pasta sauce simmering on the stove. Lucas was at a friend's house. The evening was ordinary in every way except one. Vanessa didn't sit down. She stood near the doorway, arms crossed, phone still in her hand. She spoke like she was reading a statement she'd already rehearsed. "I think we've run our course," she said. "I want a divorce. I want the house, the business, and the accounts. We can do this cleanly if you don't make it difficult." I turned off the burner. I set down the spoon. I asked about Lucas. She shrugged. "We'll figure out a schedule. Kids adjust." Adjust. Like he was a thermostat. Like 14 years could be recalibrated with paperwork and goodwill. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't ask why. I already knew. His name was Cole, 32, an architect who'd collaborated on her last 2 projects. Handsome in that careless way that photographs well. She thought I hadn't noticed, but I noticed everything. The late nights that weren't about deadlines, the texts she laughed at but never showed me, the careful distance she started keeping, not just physical, but emotional. She wanted a fresh start. I was the stale chapter. Within a week, the joint credit card stopped working, then the checking account. "Just until things are settled," she said, as if settlement were something that happened to you instead of something you created. Her mother arrived 3 days later. Diane, sharp-eyed, sharper tongue. She walked through our home like an appraiser, touching things and deciding what mattered. "You can keep the books," she said, gesturing toward my shelf. "Vanessa won't fight you for clutter." I watched her pack my father's watch into a plastic bag. Lucas watched from the stairs. I moved into a small apartment across town, close enough to keep his school routine intact, far enough to feel like exile. At his baseball games, I sat in the back. At school events, I felt eyes slide past me toward Vanessa's polished confidence. Friends stopped calling, or when they did, the questions came wrapped in assumptions. "Are you okay?" they'd ask, meaning, "What did you do?" The story had already been told, and I wasn't the hero. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't explain. I just waited. Because by then, I had already found the cracks she didn't know existed. And I knew that patience, done right, doesn't make noise when it works. Have you ever stood in a moment like that, when silence was the only weapon you had left?
The narrative moved faster than I could correct it. Within 2 weeks, Vanessa had told a version of our marriage that I barely recognized. To hear her describe it, I was the anchor, the obstacle, the man who held her back while she tried to build something beautiful. Friends I'd known for years stopped reaching out. When they did, the conversations were short, careful, full of pauses that said more than words. "We just want you both to be okay," one said. Meaning, we've chosen a side and it's not yours. I didn't argue. I didn't offer my version, because the truth doesn't win arguments, it survives them. At Lucas's school, the shift was harder to ignore. Teachers who used to greet me warmly now offered polite nods. Other parents clustered around Vanessa at pickup, their voices low and sympathetic. She played the role perfectly, tired but strong, disappointed but hopeful, a woman doing her best under difficult circumstances. I became the difficult circumstance. Lucas felt the tension even when no one named it. He started asking careful questions. "Mom says you're making this harder than it has to be," he said one evening, pushing pasta around his plate. I set down my fork. "Did she say how?" He shrugged. "She says you're being stubborn about the business stuff, that you don't want her to be happy." I watched him for a moment. 12 years old, caught between two versions of a story he never asked to be part of. "Do you believe that?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, "I don't know what to believe." That was the hardest part. Not Vanessa's accusations, not the friends who disappeared, but watching my son try to find solid ground when the adults in his life kept shifting the floor. "You don't have to choose," I told him. "You just have to pay attention. Over time, actions tell a clearer story than words." He nodded slowly, not convinced, but thinking. That was enough. Meanwhile, Vanessa accelerated. She moved Cole into conversations like he'd always been there. "Cole thinks we should expand the vendor network. Cole has ideas about repositioning the brand." Cole, the man she hadn't officially introduced, the reason she suddenly needed a fresh start. He hovered at the edges of her social media posts, never tagged but visible, a shadow preparing to step into the light. I watched it all from my small apartment, the buzzing refrigerator, the couch that smelled faintly of someone else's life, the lamp that flickered when the heat kicked on. Some nights, after Lucas was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a stack of folders, not planning revenge, planning accuracy. Because 3 years ago, long before the word divorce entered our vocabulary, I had found something Vanessa never expected me to find, and I had been waiting ever since.
It started with a number that didn't belong. 3 years before the courtroom, a Tuesday night. Lucas was asleep. Vanessa was at a client dinner that ran late, or so she said. I was reconciling accounts, something I did monthly, not because I enjoyed it, but because surprises in business usually mean someone wasn't paying attention. That night, I found a transfer I didn't recognize. Not large, not alarming on its own, but it didn't match any invoice or expense I could trace. I flagged it and kept looking. Then I found another, and another. Patterns don't announce themselves. They accumulate, like dust, like doubt. Over the following weeks, I dug deeper, quietly, carefully, not because I suspected Vanessa of anything criminal, but because the numbers weren't adding up, and she didn't seem to notice or care. What I found wasn't fraud. It was worse. It was carelessness dressed as confidence. Vendor contracts she'd signed without reading the liability clauses. Personal guarantees attached to leases she thought were standard. A line of credit secured against the house, our house, that she'd opened to cover a cash flow gap she never mentioned. The business looked healthy on the surface. Magazine features, happy clients, growing reputation. Underneath, it was bleeding. Not fast, not fatally, but steadily. And Vanessa kept signing, kept committing, kept believing that momentum would outrun the math. I brought it up once, gently. "We should review the vendor agreements," I said. "Some of these terms feel aggressive." She barely looked up from her phone.
"That's handled, Bennett. I've got it under control." She didn't. But she believed she did, and belief, when it's strong enough, becomes its own kind of blindness. I made a decision that night, not to confront her, not to fight, to document. I copied contracts, saved emails, built a quiet archive of every obligation she'd created without reading, every guarantee she'd signed without understanding. I didn't know when I'd need it. I didn't know if I ever would. But I knew that someday the math would catch up. And when it did, I wanted to be standing somewhere solid. If this story reminds you that the details people ignore often matter most, stay subscribed. Some truths only surface for those willing to pay attention. When Vanessa finally asked for the divorce, I wasn't surprised. I was ready. Mediation felt like theater. Vanessa arrived in a new blazer, confidence radiating like perfume. Her lawyer, a man named Preston Webb, sat beside her with a leather folder and a practiced calm. My lawyer, Nina Castillo, had warned me what to expect. "She wants speed," Nina said. "She thinks speed protects her. It doesn't." I nodded. In the conference room, Vanessa laid out her demands like items on a menu. The house, the business, the investment accounts, full ownership of the client relationships. My role reduced to a signature and a quiet exit. "I'm not trying to punish him," she said, glancing at me with rehearsed generosity. "I just want to move forward." Preston Webb turned to me. "Mr. Hale, do you have a counteroffer?" I shook my head. "No, I'm willing to agree." Vanessa blinked. Preston paused. Nina said nothing. We'd rehearsed this part. "You're agreeing?" Vanessa asked. Suspicion flickered beneath the surprise. "I want this resolved," I said. "I want to move on too." She studied me for a long moment, searching for the trap. Then her shoulders relaxed. The suspicion melted into satisfaction. "Good," she said. "That makes this easier." Preston, to his credit, wasn't as quick to celebrate. "Before we finalize," he said, "I'd recommend a full financial audit, standard due diligence." Vanessa waved her hand. "That's not necessary. I know the business better than anyone." "It's a significant asset transfer," Preston continued. "If there are liabilities we haven't surfaced, there aren't." She said it with the certainty of someone who had never been wrong, or at least never admitted it. Preston glanced at me, then at Nina, then back at her client. "I'd still advise." I said no. Vanessa's voice hardened. "I'm not paying for delays. Draw up the waiver." Preston hesitated. Then he reached into his folder and produced a single page, a waiver of formal audit, acknowledgement that the client had declined professional financial review despite counsel's recommendation. He explained it carefully, twice. Vanessa signed before he finished the second explanation. "There," she said. "Now let's close this." Nina caught my eye across the table. A flicker, nothing more. We both knew what she'd just done, and we both knew she had no idea. Have you ever watched someone refuse the very help that could have saved them and known you couldn't say a word? The morning of the final hearing, the sky was the color of old dishwater. I arrived early, sat on a wooden bench in the hallway and watched the courthouse fill with people carrying their own fractures. Lawyers murmured, heels clicked. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed too loud for the setting. Vanessa arrived like she was walking into an awards ceremony. New coat, new confidence. Cole hovered just outside the main doors, phone in hand, waiting to celebrate what he assumed was already decided. Diane followed 2 steps behind, chin lifted, scanning the hallway for witnesses to her daughter's triumph. Nina sat beside me, calm as ever. "Last chance to change the terms?" she said quietly. "No," I replied. "Let's finish it." Inside the courtroom, the judge, a woman with silver reading glasses and no tolerance for theater, reviewed the file.
She asked the standard questions. Did I understand what I was relinquishing? Was I signing under duress? I answered clearly, calmly. I understand. I'm signing voluntarily. Vanessa's smile was wide and public, the smile of someone who had already rehearsed the victory speech. She signed first, bold strokes, final. Then she slid the papers toward me. I took my time, not for drama, for precision, each signature exactly where it belonged. When I finished, I set the pen down and folded my hands. Preston Webb began reviewing the transfer documents, standard procedure, page by page. Then he reached the addendum. I watched his face, the flicker of confusion, the slight tightening around his eyes. He flipped back a page, then forward again, as if hoping the numbers would rearrange themselves. They didn't. He leaned back toward Vanessa and whispered. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw them land. Her smile didn't shatter, it drained, slowly, like color bleeding out of fabric left too long in the sun. She stared at the page, then at me, then back at the page. "What is this?" she whispered, too loud for the setting. Preston shook his head slightly, his jaw tight. The judge looked up. "Is there a problem?" Preston cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I need to confirm that my client understands the liability disclosures attached to this agreement." Vanessa straightened, defensive. "I understand. We're done here." The judge studied the waiver in the file, studied Preston, studied Vanessa. "Counsel advised a formal review. You declined. Is that correct?" "Yes." Vanessa's voice was clipped, impatient. "I know what I signed." The judge nodded slowly. "Very well. The agreement stands as written." The gavel came down. Soft, final. Outside the courtroom, the performance collapsed. Vanessa turned on Preston, voice rising. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I did," he said, calm, professional. "Multiple times. You declined." Cole checked his phone. His smile disappeared. He took a step back, then another, creating distance like a reflex. Diane demanded explanations no one had time to give. I gathered my papers, stood. Vanessa looked at me, really looked, for the first time in months. "You knew," she said. "I read," I replied. "There's a difference." I walked past her into the hallway. The voices rose behind me. I didn't look back.
Consequences don't arrive with sirens. They arrive as envelopes, polite fonts, official letterheads, deadlines that don't care how you feel. In the weeks after the hearing, I watched from a distance as the weight Vanessa had claimed began to settle. The house she'd fought for carried a second mortgage she'd never reviewed, payments that assumed continued income from a business now bleeding clients. The business itself, the glossy empire she'd built on charm and momentum, was tied to vendor contracts with personal guarantees, obligations she'd signed without reading, liabilities that didn't care about her confidence. The investment accounts she'd celebrated looked healthy on paper, but paper doesn't mention earmarks, promises already made elsewhere, money already spoken for. Lucas told me first. He came to the apartment one evening, quieter than usual, dropped his backpack by the door and sat at the kitchen table without being asked. "Mom's stressed," he said. "She's on the phone all the time, yelling at people." I poured him a glass of juice and sat across from him. "What kind of people?" "Banks, I think, and some guy named Preston. She keeps saying things weren't supposed to happen this way." I nodded slowly. "Sometimes people take on more than they realize," I said, "and reality takes time to catch up." He studied me for a moment. "Did you know this would happen?" I chose my words carefully. "I knew what was in the paperwork,
I knew what she was signing. I tried to slow things down once. She didn't want slow. He absorbed that. She says you tricked her. Do you believe that? He shook his head slowly. I think she tricked herself. 12 years old, already learning the truth isn't something you find, it's something you watch unfold. The calls from Diane started the following week. Her tone had shifted, no longer commanding, something closer to negotiation disguised as concern. Families work through difficulties, she said. Vanessa needs support. You could help. You could co-sign, just temporarily. No. Diane, be reasonable. I'm being accurate, I said. The agreement is finalized. I'm not part of that structure anymore. She hung up without saying goodbye. Cole disappeared faster than I expected. One week he was hovering in Vanessa's photos. The next, he was gone. No tags, no mentions, no trace. Some people are only there for the picture, not the frame. I focused on what I could build. Small things, steady things. I fixed the flickering lamp, bought a plant that didn't need much attention, started a certification course I'd put off for years. The apartment stopped feeling temporary. Peace has a texture. You don't notice it until the noise stops.
She came to the apartment on a Thursday evening. No warning, no call. Just a knock. When I opened the door, she looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, something else. Like confidence had been doing the heavy lifting, and now it was gone. No makeup, hair pulled back too tight, dark circles she hadn't bothered to hide. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She didn't sit, she paced, the way she always did when she was building towards something. "I need help," she said finally. "I know you don't owe me anything, but I don't have anywhere else to go." I leaned against the counter and waited. "The house is underwater. The business is hemorrhaging. The vendors are threatening legal action. I didn't—" She stopped, swallowed. "I didn't know it was this bad." "Yes, you did." She looked at me sharply. "You saw the contracts," I said. "You just didn't read them." "I trusted the process." "You trusted momentum. That's not the same thing." She laughed, short, bitter. "You always do this. You always make me feel stupid." "I'm not making you feel anything. I'm stating what happened." Her eyes welled. Not performance, something real. "I'm going to lose everything." I let the silence stretch. "You already did," I said. "Months ago. You're just noticing now." She stared at me, incredulous. "How can you be so cold?" "I'm not cold. I'm finished." The word landed harder than I expected. She flinched. "I could help you once," I said. "I tried. You didn't want caution. You wanted speed. You wanted someone who agreed with you. That wasn't me." "So this is punishment?" "No, this is the math you ignored. I didn't create these consequences. I just stopped standing between you and them." She wiped her eyes, straightened. "I thought we had something." "We did, and you signed it away without reading the terms." She moved toward the door, stopped with her hand on the knob. "I wish you'd fought harder." "I fought exactly as hard as I needed to." She left without slamming the door. That felt like progress. Have you ever had to choose between protecting your peace and rescuing someone from consequences they built themselves?
She came to the apartment on a Thursday evening. No warning, no call, just a knock. When I opened the door, she looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, something else. Like confidence had been doing the heavy lifting, and now it was gone. No makeup, hair pulled back too tight, dark circles she hadn't bothered to hide. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She didn't sit, she paced,
the way she always did when she was building towards something. "I need help," she said finally. "I know you don't owe me anything, but I don't have anywhere else to go." I leaned against the counter and waited. "The house is underwater. The business is hemorrhaging. The vendors are threatening legal action. I didn't—" She stopped, swallowed. "I didn't know it was this bad." "Yes, you did." She looked at me sharply. "You saw the contracts," I said. "You just didn't read them." "I trusted the process." "You trusted momentum. That's not the same thing." She laughed, short, bitter. "You always do this. You always make me feel stupid." "I'm not making you feel anything. I'm stating what happened." Her eyes welled. Not performance, something real. "I'm going to lose everything." I let the silence stretch. "You already did," I said. "Months ago. You're just noticing now." She stared at me, incredulous. "How can you be so cold?" "I'm not cold. I'm finished." The word landed harder than I expected. She flinched. "I could help you once," I said. "I tried. You didn't want caution. You wanted speed. You wanted someone who agreed with you. That wasn't me." "So this is punishment?" "No, this is the math you ignored. I didn't create these consequences. I just stopped standing between you and them." She wiped her eyes, straightened. "I thought we had something." "We did, and you signed it away without reading the terms." She moved toward the door, stopped with her hand on the knob. "I wish you'd fought harder." I fought exactly how hard I needed to. She left without slamming the door. That felt like progress. Have you ever had to choose between protecting your peace and rescuing someone from consequences they built themselves?